What's happening, guys? So today we are going to be talking about saltwater tanks. As many of us know, saltwater tanks are amazing to look at. Well, I did say tanks, just not Nagini's tank. So here's my personal experience of dealing with a saltwater tank after just a year and a half of dealing with my saltwater reef tank and my saltwater fish only tank. So from first sight, setting up a freshwater tank may not seem very much different than setting up a saltwater tank. You just throw some rocks in there, some fish, maybe an axolotl, and then voila, you got a tank. But saltwater does indeed take a little bit more extra energy than freshwater. The main differences in saltwater versus the freshwater tanks are, of course, the salt, which is the salinity. So you got to check this thing right here, which is a hydrometer. Some people use a refractometer, which is a lot better, but I'm cheap and this works just as fine. So when I first started with my saltwater tank, checking the salinity was probably one of the most scariest things. I don't know why. I just felt like I was just going to destroy my tank by not keeping track of the salinity, and it was going to raise drastically or drop drastically low. But honestly, guys, as you can see here, the salinity is staying at a steady pace. It's not fluctuating. It's not going to change on you overnight unless you have like a really cold room or a really hot room and the temperature is messing with the evaporation of your tank. Salt does not evaporate, water does. So all the salt in your tank is going to remain in your tank. So when your tank water level drops, your salt's still going to stay in that tank, which is going to raise your salinity. So that's just one of the simple things that you're going to want to keep track of. Which brings me to my next thing with saltwater, which is checking your water quality. Water parameters is everything when it comes to saltwater. I've got friends who have freshwater tanks. They don't check anything. They just change their water out and go about their day. People get away with it and the fish are still alive. I feel bad for saying that. All right, guys, I'm back. So that isn't okay. It's really bad. You should definitely check your parameters because you never know what's going on in your tank. But with saltwater, it is so dire. I definitely recommend you guys getting one of these. I'll leave a link in the description below. But with saltwater, things can just change in the blink of an eye and you can just have a swing out of nowhere, especially with the smaller tanks. So if you guys got a nano reef or a pico reef like I have, you're definitely going to want to look into this if you don't already have one. This is one of the biggest differences in saltwater, especially when you have a predator tank like this. You got a predator fish and you got a lot of shrimp in there and they produce a lot of waste and things can just kind of die in the tank in the corner. You never end up finding it because it's under that big piece of live rock and it's just causing so much ammonia and you're just spiking up and things can just go really south really fast and your whole tank can just crash, guys. So this is definitely something you want to look into. So with all the checking your parameters talk, if you have a saltwater reef tank, this is definitely important, which is dosing your tank and adding different additives to your tank. Things like calcium, because corals can consume a lot of calcium, and the more corals you have, the more they are fighting for that last bit of calcium that is in the tank that is available to them, along with light and everything else, flow, everything else that they're dealing with. They're fighting over this, they're fighting over magnesium, they're fighting over so many different compounds inside of your tank, guys. You're definitely gonna wanna check out dosing and look into that a lot more. You're definitely gonna have to do your research on it because you don't wanna dose too much, you don't wanna dose too little. It's just gotta be just right. But once you get the hang of it, it's really not that hard, along with everything else, guys. Once you get the hang of everything with saltwater, it's really not that hard. It just becomes muscle memory and you just do it, you know? There's also your lighting that you want to check out. If you've got a reef tank, obviously it's going to be a lot different than if you have a fish only tank. With the fish only tank, your lighting can be the same as just using this on the freshwater like I'm using. But when you have the reef tank, you're going to want to use a reef lighting because you need the blue light, and your corals also need other lights like white lights in order to grow, in order to photosynthesize, because they are quite like plants and they just need the lighting. And without the adequate amount of light, they are not going to grow to their full potential, and they may not grow at all, guys. So this is one of the biggest differences when it comes to lighting in saltwater tanks. And my final and most important difference is right here, guys. So important because this is pre-made saltwater, but you can also mix it with box saltwater from your aquarium store. But the reason that this is so important is because you need to make sure when you do your water changes, you're resupplying your tank with the correct amount of salt. I cannot tell you how many times I've added too little salt or too much salt to my tank and just completely screwed everything up. Because when you go to top off your tank, you do not top your tank off with salt water, because the salt in your tank does not evaporate. The water evaporates, but the salt remains in your tank. So the lower your water levels in your tank begin to drop, the higher your salinity levels here start to rise. I've had times where I went to top off my tank, I took and grabbed my salt water, my pre-made salt water, and topped my tank off with my pre-made salt water and just destroyed my reef tank, just burned all my corals and killed everything in the reef tank except for maybe a few small copepods and bristleworms and stuff like that. But guys, you have to be careful with this. This is probably the #1 killer of all saltwater tanks right here in the world, guys. In the world, this is probably the most biggest thing I've probably got to say to you guys is watch that water.
Watch that water.
So pretty much, if you take out a gallon of salt water from your tank, replace it with a gallon of salt water. If you notice that a gallon of salt water is missing from your tank, replace it with a gallon of fresh water. If you come back to your tank and it looks a little bit lower than it did before, it's because you're having evaporation. So you're definitely going to want to go ahead and replace it with fresh water just to top it off. That's called a top off. You just go ahead and top it off and you're done. But if you're doing a water change and you take out a gallon of that salt water, you're going to want to go ahead and replace it with a gallon of your own salt water and just be done at that. When it comes to salt water, it's not really hard. It's just a lot of repetitive stuff that you got to get in your mind. Saltwater is a very rewarding hobby. I mean, freshwater is the same hobby as fish keeping hobby, but saltwater is just this whole different entity, and it's just really cool just to get in touch with the ocean. It's like having the ocean in your house and having the pond.
I don't know. That doesn't make any sense.
Anyways, with saltwater, it's just really rewarding to have, and I would really definitely recommend that you do a lot of research. I can't even fathom to think of how many times I went on Google and was like,
what is this little thing swimming in my tank? Oh, a copepod. Okay, that's cool. What fish goes with this fish? Why is my coral not growing? What coral can sit next to this coral?
It's just a lot of stuff like that, guys. It's just a lot of Googling and a lot of reading and researching. Remember, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power, guys. And with the saltwater hobby, the fish keeping hobby in general, that is always going to be key. That is king in this hobby, guys. But anyways, guys, if you enjoyed my content, then smash that like button. Leave a comment below in the comment section if you have any questions. I'll definitely get back to you on that. But anyways, guys, I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.